My name is Christoph Lüdke. I'm professor of business ethics at the Technical University of Munich, and I'm also the director of the Institute for Ethics in Artificial Intelligence. With our speaker series, the TUM Institute for Ethics in AI invites experts from all over the world to talk about ethics and governance of AI. These events serve as an important platform for sharing new research and exchanging knowledge. Since our launch in 2019, we were already able to run 28 speaker series events. And today, we are delighted to have with us Jeannie Mary Paterson, who is joining us from Melbourne University to talk about ChatGPT, ethics, law, and the digital integrity arms race, a topic that certainly gained a lot of attention lately. Let me say a few more words about our distinguished guest speaker. Jeannie Paterson is a professor of law at the University of Melbourne and founding co-director of the Center for AI and Digital Ethics, which is an interdisciplinary research, teaching, and policy center at the University of Melbourne, which involves the faculties of engineering, IT, law, arts, medicine, education, and others. Jeannie is also a member of our Global AI Ethics Consortium and one of the instructors of our AI Ethics Global Perspectives free online course. Her expertise lies in the areas of consumer protection, consumer credit and data protection law, as well as the law of emerging digital technologies, AI, and robotics. Her research focuses on regulatory design for fair, safe, and accountable consumer products and technologies. Jeannie's research has been cited by law reform inquiries and by courts, including by the High Court of Australia, and she has successfully managed numerous research grants, funding, and collaborated in research projects in the public and not-for-profit sectors. So we will start with your presentation, Jeannie. During this time, I would like to ask you all to turn off your camera and leave your microphone muted. After the presentation, we will open the floor to your questions and comments and try to answer as many questions as possible. Jeannie, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Christoph and Caitlin. And I'll just take a minute. I'm going to share my screen, which always takes a minute or two to set up. There we go. So everybody should be able to see the slides, I'm hoping, and hear me. So I've already been announced. So thank you very much for that kind announcement. And this is part of a research project, which is New Legal Thinking for Emerging Technologies, which is the Ninian Stephen Law Program funded by the Menzies Foundation. And before I begin, I just wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm living and working here in Melbourne, Australia, and that is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I pay my respect to their elders past and present, and the Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here today. And I also want to acknowledge the contribution of Carmelina Contarino, who is the CADE Research and Teaching Associate, who contributed quite a lot to this presentation. So thank you to her as well. Now, of course, ChatGPT is everywhere at the moment. Debates are ranging in the news and in tech circles and at universities and in law firms about how good the product is, the challenges it presents to professions such as law, journalism, copy editing, translation, and so on. And debates are raging about what ChatGPT means for education and the integrity of assessment. Commercial providers are developing tools to detect when ChatGPT and similar products are being used, and others are advocating changes in how we understand work, education, and indeed the assessment endeavour, even the existence of writing. There's also more esoteric debates about what ChatGPT means in terms of our theory of mind, our understanding of sentience, and how we understand that divide between humans and machines. Now, I can't resolve those uncertainties, debates, and challenges, and the technology is changing so quickly that it would be hard to do it. ChatGPT was launched in November 2022. In October 2022, Carmelina and I were teaching our class of first-year students how to use GPT-3, which was a precursor, a much rougher precursor, and in the space of the month, we have an app that's available on your phone. What I wanted to do today, though, is to try and navigate some of the hype and some of the hysteria around ChatGPT. I think a clear, a grounded perspective on the opportunities this technology presents and the risks of the technology are the first step in thinking about how we might respond to it in ways that are consistent with social values and human rights. So, ChatGPT. I'm guessing that many of you have already had a go at this technology. In response to a prompt that you, the consumer, puts in, it produces a generally plausible and articulate text. You can ask it to do a pastiche of various authors or styles. Australia's own Nick Cave has been copied and has called the technological output, in the style of his music, as a grotesque mockery of what it is to be human. So how does ChatGPT work? I think this is a little technical, and I'm not a computer scientist, but it's critical to understanding the impact of the technology. And as I said, cutting through that hype. So ChatGPT, the product has its origins in a large machine learning language models developed from a language data set combined with significant computational power. ChatGPT is an interface built on the GPT 3.5 large language model. GPT itself is a generative pre-trained transformer developed by OpenAI and first published in 2018. It was built by downloading a vast amount of text from the internet, which was then fed into a neural network. And the data used to train the successive GPT models included freely available ebooks, pages hyperlinked in Reddit posts, various internet source data sets, the English version of Wikipedia, and so on. So a variety of sources, and perhaps not what always we would think of the most accurate prose. OpenAI used reinforcement training to fine-tune the capacity of that large language model to produce ChatGPT, and trained it to respond to user prompts. And then the GPT model, which goes into ChatGPT, the product, has also been used for training for more specific applications. So, for example, understanding legal text, copy editing, marketing, and so on. Now, ChatGPT is what's called generative AI. So many of you will have interacted with chatbots, which sit down the bottom corner of airlines and banks and telcos and just about anything online. And they're those little things that pop up in the corner and go, can I help you with your inquiry? Now, those kind of chatbots aren't generative. Generally, the chatbots we see in trade and commerce are programmed by reference to rules. So they might use natural language processing to identify the intention of the speaker, what you type in, but they're responding by reference to rules that have been programmed by the people that are using the product. And they don't want that chatbot to go off script because they don't know what it might say. It may not be conducive to their economic model. ChatGPT, by contrast, is what we call generative and potentially in the future adaptive. This means it generates a response to the prompt without being pre-programmed to do that, without the existence of human designed rules about what the response to the prompt will be. But it doesn't have understanding or intention as we would understand those concepts currently. When ChatGPT provides a response to a prompt, it is effectively matching the patterns identified in the data training set to provide information that matches the intent of the prompt. So what it's doing is turning each word in the prompt into a token, which is a form of data, and then matching that token with what's in the database. And it's looking for similar words and similar combinations of words to find the information that might be relevant to the prompt. And then it basically reorders that information that it's found, matching the prompt, into plausible language, using the rules that it's learned about how, in this case, the English language works. So the response is broad-ranging. It's often contextual in the sense that it's pulling in lots of different kinds of information. It's usually accurate, but it has limitations, which I'll talk about shortly. The point I wanted to make here is that it's not thinking. It's not thinking about what the person who made the inquiry wants. It's not understanding their intention. It's not coming up with ideas of its own. It's creating a response by finding patterns in language, which is important when we come to the debates and the ethical questions around the product. So what are the challenges of ChatGPT? The articulate and seemingly accurate responses made possible by ChatGPT have raised many concerns about what the advent of the technology means for any profession or job that depends on writing. This means journalists have been asked whether ChatGPT will save them time, but they may also be worried there may be fewer jobs for journalists and less training for junior writers. Similarly, in the law, ChatGPT might reduce the need for lawyers to spend time crafting legal advice or writing judgments. This might be beneficial as removing the cost to the ordinary person of consulting a lawyer, or it might be negative in reducing the need for lawyers, and undermining the training of junior lawyers. It may result in a two-tier system where the wealthy have access to a trained human lawyer and the poor have access to ChatGPT, which may seem fine, except that, as you can see on the screen, the ChatGPT was trained on data that came to an end in 2021, so its knowledge of future events is quite limited. In my field, education, ChatGPT might refine the writing skills of students and assist those with disabilities or who are learning in a language that is not their own to improve their writing skills. ChatGPT may be a prompt to students to understand the skill of writing, to reflect on their own writing. On the other hand, there are concerns that it will allow students to cheat by producing work that is not their own and without being detected by plagiarism technology, because plagiarism technology generally tries to match the words in a student assignment with sources that are available on the internet. And that's precisely not what ChatGPT is doing. It's actually creating its own responses from the sources that it's found. So it's not going to be picked up by standard plagiarism detection software. My own view is that the outcome is somewhere in the middle. ChatGPT can be used to improve written outputs, but it will not replace the importance of training and effort by humans. ChatGPT is not fail-proof, so expert human scrutiny remains important. For example, as I've said, it's poor with information after 2021, and the quality of its outputs are influenced by the kind of input that's given. So it responds better to statements, explain quantum computing, list creative ideas for a 10-year-old's birthday. It responds better to inquiring statements than it does to questions because the statement narrows down the task. Sometimes it simply gets things wrong. It picks up a pattern that's false or misleading, that has been replicated in the sources it's trained on, but not previously identified. Moreover, we're already using a variety of tools to improve our writing in various contexts. Most students refer, I'm afraid, to Wikipedia when they're researching a topic and make use of software such as Grammarly to improve their writing skills. So in that sense, ChatGPT is another step along the line that we've already gone to. It's not our first incursion into technology-informed writing. but others disagree with me. Some people think that the impact may be catastrophic. And certainly that has been common with automation more generally. Often automation has the effect of impacting most heavily on those least able to protect their own interests, those with fewer skills. And the impact of technological change in the market is usually felt unevenly. It's not spread across the market generally. Certain members of the population tend to be affected by technological change and put out of work, usually the least people who have lower skills or little ability to retrain. So I've said I'm not as worried about ChatGPT as some people are, but if we are worried about it, what is the answer? Well, one response has actually just been to sync or dedicate resources to identifying when students and others have used ChatGPT to produce work. So if students are using ChatGPT to write an essay or complete an exam, one response has been to try and detect that and to penalise the students for in some way plagiarising work, though of course it's not an ordinary form of plagiarisation. So there's been many guides about how to identify ChatGPT authored material. And there's also tech providers that are offering authentication services. So you can see that Turnitin, which I mentioned before, is saying that it's developing software that will be able to develop the sort of combined and reformulated information that comes out of ChatGPT when it's asked to write an essay. ChatGPT doesn't provide references yet. So a piece of writing that needs footnotes or in-text references may not be able to produce through that technology so easily. And yet, going to my point above, we're likely to see, I think, human-machine collaborations in this space, which means it's going to be difficult for any technology to pick up work, I think, that's been written by ChatGPT. We're going to have kind of an arms race in the sense that the ChatGPT is going to get more sophisticated, it's going to learn to do referencing, it's going to improve the flow of the text it produces. And I suspect that the technologies like Turnitin or the rules of thumb for identifying when a student or someone else has used the technology are going to be constantly falling short. We see a similar pattern, in fact, with deepfake images. Deepfake images have just got better and better, and the software tools for detecting those images are sort of lagging just behind in a sort of catch-up game. I guess my comment would be, perhaps it doesn't matter. At the moment, let me rephrase that. At the moment, the text that's produced by ChatGPT has a number of flaws. It may not be accurate. It's poor after 2021, and it has a kind of pastiched or jerky style. Now, those may be ways of identifying that the technology has been used, but then again, that's the way lots of people write. Not everybody writes beautifully. And so even if ChatGPT is not perfect, it may still be better at writing than the average human. The stream of consciousness writing that we see produced sometimes by ChatGPT is also a characteristic of anybody who tries to write in a hurry. So I guess my point is here, the clues to writing that's been done by the chat bot may also just indicate someone who's not very good at writing or someone who's writing in a hurry. I'm not sure that we're going to be able to find prompts to identify when it's done by technology and when it isn't. So we need to think about other responses. Now, in law, the response to concerns about ChatGPT are likely to be quite easily resolved. If ChatGPT provides a response that is inaccurate or misrepresents the true state of affairs, or is in other ways harmful, discriminatory, obnoxious, that may cause harm to the person who reads that response. In law, So, for example, think of a lawyer who uses ChatGPT to write a legal advice, and ChatGPT gets the information wrong, causing the client to suffer losses. Or imagine a teacher who uses ChatGPT to plan a lesson, but ends up teaching the wrong curriculum. Or a professor who gives feedback on an assignment and gives feedback that's inaccurate or offensive. Or a weather service writing a weather report that simply produces a wrong description of the forthcoming weather, causing harm to farmers who planned their day accordingly. In all of these examples, the output might be wrong because it's based on information that's stocked in 2021, or it might be wrong because ChatGPT just got it wrong, made the wrong associations in the words and concepts it's looking at. A person who relies on the information and is worse off may seek some kind of legal remedy. And the person they'll seek the legal remedy for is the user of ChatGPT. ChatGPT isn't a person, so we're never going to sue it. We're going to sue the user of the ChatGPT who used that technology to put information out into the world that's wrong. And in law, that person who uses the technology to put information out into the world is liable for the harms of that information. The fact they thought the technology was reliable is irrelevant, and the fact that they didn't intend to cause harm is irrelevant. I've also added there that the use of the text to generate output may not actually be a copyright infringement, as some people have wondered about. It may just be fair use because, of course, it's not replicating the technology precisely. I think actually that the questions about ChatGPT that are more interesting are the questions about the ethics around the technology. And we can use ethical frameworks for AI to interrogate these concerns. So generally, one of the issues that's raised about AI is it fair? Bias and discrimination are concerns in most large data machine learning models. And this is because the technology amplifies biases that already exist in the data and also doesn't know when relevant information is missing, so that when it's not, its outputs aren't capturing a segment of the population. This can have very problematic outcomes in all sorts of contexts. The Twitter bot, Tay, released by Microsoft in 2016, quickly it was released to Twitter to have conversations with young people. It quickly had to be pulled down because it became racist and started sort of spitting out horrible statements about race and gender and the like. It learned those offensive statements from the conversations that were happening on Twitter. So the problem with language models is they tend to replicate what's happening in the data, and if the data is flawed, so will be the outputs of the technology. Now, apparently, OpenAI, and they're the people that developed ChatGPT, cleaned offensive conduct from the data they used to train the GPT model. It's unclear how well they've succeeded. We need to wait a bit longer to see whether there's trends of bias, discrimination, or otherwise offensive conduct in the outputs of the technology. But the cleaning of the data, and indeed the efforts we'll put in to make sure ChatGPT responds in an appropriate and not offensive way, raise another concern. Most of this work, cleaning the data, removing offensive, horrific information from the training sources, was done by lowly paid workers in the global south. And this is quite a common trend of technology, that the dirty work, be it mining rare metals or dealing with offensive visual images on social media, or in this case, cleaning the language models, is done by poorly paid workers with few other options and very little psychological support for the trauma that they might be witnessing. One of the ongoing issues that we're thinking about ethical AI is the ethics of how the technology is distributed, who benefits from the technology, and who's bearing the brunt of that development. And that brings me to the question of, is the technology equitable? What does this mean? For some people, GPT may be simply a game, a way of annoying Nick Cave by writing lyrics that sound like him, or writing silly romantic poetry for Valentine's Day, or perhaps profound romantic poetry, depending on your perspective. But for others, it may be a really useful tool. For example, people who I think I mentioned before, people who struggle with writing, people whose first language isn't English, people who need to produce in a short period of time polished and articulate copy, may all find the tool very, very useful. And who are we to say that those people shouldn't have access to the tool that is ChatGPT, just because some of us have decided it's some form of cheating to use technology to write good prose? And that brings me to the next consideration, which is that the technology should be good for humans, or sometimes, as it's framed in AI frameworks, beneficent. Much of the concern about emerging technologies, generally, and AI specifically, concerns its effect on humans. The worry is that advances in technology to save us time or make our lives easier may not benefit us and may even harm us. With chatbots and voice assistants like Siri, one concern is over cognitive degeneration. And this is the idea that using these tools makes us less smart. The example that might be given is our reliance on Google Maps not only results in us handing over data about our location to Google, which is then used for marketing, but it also erodes our capacity to read maps, and reading maps is a useful skill for humans. Danaher thinks that this concern about cognitive degeneration is overrated. He says we don't need to feel sad about not doing ourselves tasks that are boring and repetitive. And Danaher uses the example of the calculator. For most of us, the calculator is a really good way of doing simple arithmetic that helps us manage our finances. And yes, it does mean we can't do long division or multiply large numbers, but in most instances, that actually doesn't matter. It saves us time to do things that might be more meaningful in our lives. Danaher suggests that some of the uses of virtual assistants and chatbots are similar. But the concern about cognitive decline or cognitive degeneration may be more profound in the context of a language model or a language producing app like ChatGPT. If the app speaks for us, we might ask, are we thinking? Or at least, are we thinking deeply, critically, or creatively? There is a strong argument that we develop our cognitive skills by expressing ourselves. The act of writing, particularly the act of writing in our professions or in educational institutions, develops our ability to produce rational, reasoned argument, and also our ability to express ourselves creatively or beautifully. ChatGPT may perhaps erode these kinds of skills. But of course, that may not be the case. ChatGPT doesn't free us from expressing ourselves or engaging in critical analysis. As I said earlier, ChatGPT works best through a series of well-designed prompts. We have to think carefully about what we ask ChatGPT to do to get the best out of it. That may be sufficient to retain our cognitive skills, the act of thinking critically. Moreover, we've just heard, the technology is not accurate and it's not always up to date, which again means that our relationship with ChatGPT and similar programs is likely to be collaborative. It's not replacing the act of thinking or writing, it's helping us do better, at least on one view. But that brings me then to accountability. Accountability is an interesting concept when applied to ChatGPT. We've seen that the use of the app does not relieve the person using the app to produce information from liability or responsibility for errors or misrepresentations. And that's a form of accountability. But it's an after-the-fact form of accountability. It means that it relies on someone, being misled by information, suffering loss, then bringing the matter to court. So it only kicks in when something goes wrong. And we'd prefer things don't go wrong, and we'd prefer an ex ante or an upfront response to keep technology accountable. And this is, in fact, the idea behind the EU's AI Act, that it sets down standards that have to be followed to ensure the technology that reaches the marketplace is safe, as opposed to waiting for something to go wrong and then dealing with it through litigation. Now, this kind of accountability can come through the care taken by OpenAI and other providers of the technology in how it cleans the data set and trains the model. But it can also be provided through those who use the technology, through ongoing monitoring and also training of those who use it. The law, we don't need the law to do this. Indeed, the law is probably too slow and rigid to lay down standards about how this type of technology should work. It may be that codes of AI ethics or responsible AI or principles of how we should be managing data in technologies that interact with the population are a better guide here, because they are concerned with the quality of the data that goes into the model and the need for constant auditing of the outputs of the technologies to ensure that it's not amplifying existing bias or discrimination or causing other kinds of harms, and it is indeed operating the way that it has been intended. And we see that sort of model used in cybersecurity, with people embedding processes and procedures in companies to keep data safe from being hacked, where the law comes in much later. And that's probably the model for accountability for technologies such as ChatGPT. What I think we need to remember there is that if we're going to have accountability and governance models around the technology to make it safe for users, then we need to make sure that we understand who the users are and not make assumptions that it's one narrow section of the population, but that our checks and balances that are put on the technology actually are representative of the wider community who might be using it. And this, I think, leads me to my last ethical standard, which is transparency. You may be familiar with Asimov's laws of robotics, which effectively talked about the way robots should not harm humans. And in fact, as it turns out, the laws of robotics turned out to be quite contradictory. And that's the moral, if you like, of the stories that Asimov wrote. People who were dealing with modern robotics, such as Frank Pasquale, have said that one of the new laws of robotics is that robots, or AI, should not misrepresent themselves to humans. They should not pretend to be human when they're not. And I think this applies to ChatGPT. It's dishonest to present ChatGPT as one's own work if it's not. It's dishonest to present it as entirely one's own work if it's not. It's not dishonest to talk about the collaboration between a human and the technology. And this is perhaps the way that universities need to go, rather than it being engaged in a never-ending attempt to catch plagiarism using this technology. But it's also important to realise that we shouldn't trick other people about the capacities of ChatGPT. We should never use it to convince people they are dealing with a human when they're not. And we also shouldn't use it to trick people into thinking it's an oracle of accurate information. Transparency means sharing the benefits and the flaws of the technology with people who may come into contact with it. It means allowing those who might use the technology, who may be subject to the technology, to understand what they're dealing with, what the limits of that technology are. And it means doing that in an equitable sense. Moreover, in building human relationships, sometimes authentic communication is better than polished communication. So sometimes our stumbling efforts to express ourselves may be better at creating a meaningful bond with another human person than the glossy prestige that's provided by this technology. ChatGPT doesn't have a theory of mind. It doesn't understand what the other person is thinking. It's finding patterns in data. It's doing it magnificently, impressively, but it's nonetheless finding patterns in data mechanicalistically. It's humans who understand humans best. And that's something that's really important when we're thinking about how we use ChatGPT and how we regulate it. It should never replace human interactions, and nor should it be used to intimidate humans into thinking they're dealing with some supernatural being that will always be right and they can never challenge. We need a grounded and measured view of the technology. So where to from here? It's hard to tell. As I mentioned, the thing was not in existence a few months ago. What I suggest, though, is that we should not catastrophize ChatGPT, and nor should we inflate the capacities of the technology. It's important that people around us and ourselves take the time to understand what the technology can do and what the limitations are. We should also take the opportunity to reflect on our relationship with technology. I don't think ChatGPT causes cognitive decline, but I think over-reliance on technology erodes the bonds of relationship that are so important in human societies. ChatGPT should be regarded as a tool and not as our friend. And that's all I needed to say.
Thank you very much for this fascinating talk about such a new subject. So I, as a philosopher, I'm always reminded of the statement that the owl of Minerva flies only in the evening. With ChatGPT, we have to fly very, very early on before the sun even rises. Okay, thank you. I have one question or one remark from my side. I mean, there's a lot of talk about this. Should you ban ChatGPT in Germany? And schools have been reacting to this actually quite favorably from what I have seen so far, saying, well, we should learn how to deal with it, but not ban it. Really, I haven't heard of many attempts here. But you're also saying it should always make it transparent, or students should make it transparent that they use ChatGPT. Is that right? Because I know from other AI bots, it's especially chatbots, that there was a study, I think 1 or 2 years ago, which said, well, if they have to disclose that they are chatbots, they can, at least in a number of cases, not fulfill their purpose, because then people trust them less. If you've seen it, how would you react to that?
Well, that's so interesting. And in fact, I've looked at those studies about chatbots and when people trust them. So I think that, first of all, there's no point trying to ban this technology. It's like trying to ban rain or mercury. It's going to keep coming at us. So the bans aren't going to work. Several schools in Australia have banned it, but I think that's until they work out a strategy for responding. Most universities are looking for a collaborative approach. So I don't think we can ban it. We have to learn to work with this technology and other technologies. But I think transparency is so critical to dealing ethically with ChatGPT or any other chatbot. Now, it's really interesting. The studies you mentioned said people trust chatbots less if they know it's a chatbot. But that should tell us the answer. You shouldn't trick people into trusting you. It's just wrong. It's insulting to people to treat them as a means to your ends by effectively deceiving them. So companies who talk about the need for trust are really talking about a short-term trust, a trust that arises from the interaction with the chatbot or the GPT bot. It's not a long-term trust because it's already been eroded by the trick that's played on the customer. So I really agree with Frank Pasquale that a new law of robotics is don't deceive people into thinking an AI is a person. An AI isn't a person, and we should never confuse the two. So I feel quite strong about that. But I think it goes further than just disclosing that the AI or the chat GPT is technology, because humans like to anthropomorphize the things they're dealing with. So merely disclosing, by the way, I'm a chatbot, or by the way, I'm an AI, may not be enough. It may be that we need to constantly remind people, or we need to have slight prompts in the conversation to just keep reminding people that it's not a person. Otherwise they fall into this trap of going, oh yeah, but it's sort of responding to me, so it's like a person. It's not like a person at all. It is nothing like a person, and people shouldn't think that. And I guess the last one that I'd warn against is that generally people tend to overestimate the capacity of AI. We tend to, in the newspapers and in the common discussions of ChatGPT and other technologies, we're really fascinated by this idea of superhuman intelligence. And we saw that a little while ago when a Google engineer thought that the technology he was dealing with was sentient. And there's been talks about ChatGPT being sentient too. It's because we want to believe that this thing is bigger and better than us. It's not. It's just a technology. So I think in all sorts of ways we need to be very transparent and kind of dampening down the hype. It's a useful tool, but that's it.
Okay, thank you. We have a number of questions here. Let me start with the one in the chat. How can we improve informed consent issues when training large language models like ChatGPT using data scrapped from the internet?
Yeah, it's a real issue. I mean, I'm probably less worried about the training of ChatGPT because a lot of the data it's been using is publicly available and collaboratively written. So Wikipedia or ebooks that are freely available. But the problem of scraping data from the internet is a real one. And if we think about Clearview AI, which is a facial recognition technology, there we have the scraping of biometric data from the internet, which can then be used to re-identify people, which is hugely problematic. And I have to say that I would say that we can never manage these concerns with consent. We just need to ban it. And I'm sorry, that sounds extreme, but I think that once we cross the line to taking people's biometric data, that should be a no-go zone, except in very limited circumstances, which of course are being debated over in the EU.
Yes, as I understand, the EU AI Act will probably do exactly what you're suggesting. Another question is, what about ChatGPT in lesser used languages? What are the equity implications here?
Oh, I think they're huge. I think that's such a good point. So ChatGPT is primarily an English language model at the moment. And so, yes, lesser used languages are really interesting, but it's not a straightforward answer. So I think a lot of Indigenous communities, for example, have already been the subject to the colonialist extraction of their data. One of the things that colonialists did when they arrived in, say, Australia is collect a whole lot of medical and health information from our Indigenous communities, which is in some cases still sitting out of control of those people. On the one hand, maybe these natural language processing models might be used to give new life to Indigenous languages. But on the other hand, we don't want those languages being extracted and commoditized and taken out of the control of Indigenous people. So I think with the language question, we need to be very respectful of the communities in question and perhaps be giving them the resources to decide how they will use the technology and what the relationship between the technology and their languages and culture should be.
But there is also, I mean, a follow-up from my side about this, since I mean, what you said is right, that it's using data that is not going or not extending beyond 2021. But of course, I mean, it can be further developed, or it can make in the future make use of much more data. And I would think that we will see lots of these of these pieces of software in other languages, and which would, I would think, help actually for, I mean, especially for lesser used languages.
I think that must be right. I think we need to be very careful with Indigenous populations and some minority groups that want to retain sovereignty over their language and data. But yes, certainly, I think that there's been a question asked: do people no longer have to use language because they're increasingly going to be able to use ChatGPT or equivalents, equivalent in China or equivalent in the South America to translate languages. So I think you're right. I think we will see more language models and a lot more translation happening.
Or even talk to others in artificial languages, like, I mean, the Elvish from Lord of the Rings or something like that.
Indeed, and that's quite a delightful outcome. So it's good to be balanced about this, because there are some really useful outcomes of ChatGPT. I'm dyslexic, so I can't spell, and I find it very hard to proofread my own material. I can use various tools, but something like ChatGPT might be fantastic for me improving my writing. And I'm sure there's many people who would like that opportunity.
Great. So here's another question. How do you suggest to keep the balance around ethical use versus availability of AI tools in open markets? Did you get that?
Yeah, I think this is not just a question of ChatGPT. It's a question of how we share the benefits of technology, and that happens within our own communities. So, for example, ChatGPT was free when it first was developed, and now there's a fee. And you can still use the free version, but the fee version is better and more available. And there's a real equity issue in that. So if we accept that students increasingly are going to be using this technology to improve their writing, or indeed their coding, because of course ChatGPT or its sister product can be used to write code, if we accept that students are going to use this technology, it is just palpably inequitable that some students can afford it and some students can't. So that's a question that universities and society needs to think about. And then the same thing happens if we think about the global north and the global south. How do we, as the technology richer countries, make sure that the benefits of technology are shared, as opposed to just extracting the value of labor to make the technology work?
Here is someone asking, would you add ChatGPT as an author on a scientific article if it was used to improve language?
Well, people are already doing this. People have added them as authors, and some universities are suggesting that students should add ChatGPT as a co-author. And I guess that goes to my transparency point. I think at the moment anyway, it's a collaborative process, but we need to be transparent that we're working with it. But we also need to be very careful of explaining to students or workers or other people using the technology what its limitations are. We need to realize it's not always accurate, and that it may be flawed and that it's not very good in certain contexts, and that's also important. So those with more knowledge need to be transparent about the limitations, and those who are using it need to be transparent about the collaboration.
Here's a question about the biases, and you mentioned that in your talk about the possible biases built into it, or even the, I hesitate to call it anti-bias, which was brought in by the people who are training on or modifying responses, and there have been worries about that. Yeah, I'm taking the question a bit further and about how certain things are not talked about or cannot be talked about, cannot even be covered by the AI or by ChatGPT in this case. How do you see this problem?
This is a big problem in the internet, isn't it? Because on the one hand, technologies, social media, the internet, ChatGPT are great levelers. It gives all sorts of people access to language and images and information, but we already know that there are biases in what images are shared, say, on Instagram. We know that TikTok has been accused of promoting attractive people and of kind of demoting TikToks made by, say, people with disabilities or people that it characterizes as less attractive. So the choices that are made in training about what language associations are acceptable is a very important and profound question. And my colleague, Leah Rupiner at Melbourne University, who I think you might know, has done a lot of work in the gendered nature of language and how when we're using language models, there are assumptions made about gender and political belief and ethnicity that aren't apparent at first sight, but they're nonetheless replicating certain stereotypes and power imbalances. So I don't have an answer, but I think that is such an important question. And to the person who asked it, yes, I agree.
Okay. Is a question that I think you covered it somehow. Do you think we need new forms of laws and regulation to regulate generative AI like ChatGPT, or is regulation such as the GDPR sufficient? I mean, this is, I think, from a European angle also. Do you want to make a comment on that?
So I think ChatGPT raises the GDPR less because actually the concern about ChatGPT is, I think, the capacity for fraud, really, that it's used in ways that aren't truthful, either to manipulate it, somebody making a decision, or to trick them into thinking that they're dealing with a person. So I think that existing law actually can deal with those fundamental questions. But what I think is that law perhaps needs to be complemented by guidelines or standards of acceptable use